okay, is using rock dust or seawater to create more fertility in his ground. Creating more fertility means more organic matter. Every 1% increase in organic matter in the soil is close to over $100 worth of carbon that's being sequestered. So, when they talk about carbon credits and stuff like that, though I'm not really a proponent of this man-caused global warming thing, I'm not quite sure if the jury's still in. I know there's a lot of scientists that now have come public and are disagreeing with a lot of the politicized demonization of carbon dioxide. But if we're going to go down that road, the reality is that every organic farmer should be being subsidized by these carbon credit characters to the tune of $100 an acre for every percent increase in organic matter. Okay? By remineralizing, you actually can create organic matter because these minerals are then eaten by organisms and turned into organic matter. And it's realized by the increased sugar content in the plant because of the photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is the act of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turning it into sugar into plants and stuff like that. And so since farmers are also miners of minerals, the oil and gas companies get huge tax credits. It's called an oil depletion allowance. So as they're pulling oil out of the ground, they're getting a subsidy from the government because the next barrel of oil is going to be a little more expensive to pull out. It's called an oil depletion allowance. They actually get credits and they get subsidized. Wow. Every farmer, there should be a mineral depletion allowance for every crop that he pulls out of the ground. For at least that's enough money for him to go get rock dust and seawater and remineralize his ground. And this shouldn't cost us anything because what are the results of this? It's nutrient-dense food. And what is the result of nutrient-dense food? This is just one aspect. The nutrient-dense food creates a healthier population and can literally reduce health care because people are healthier. Nutrient-dense, fertile ground is less prone to erosion. Nutrient-dense, fertile ground doesn't require as much chemical fertilizers. Nutrient-dense, fertile ground, therefore, isn't creating erosion, isn't losing topsoil, isn't polluting the nearshore environment, isn't polluting water, and then a healthier plant with the right minerals, creating the right colors and flavors that are in the plant, are able to resist funguses and diseases and solar radiation and different kinds of things that reduce yields, and therefore the farmer doesn't have to use fungicides and highly toxic chemicals to kill insects and to do this. You can still pull off a crop without having to use these highly toxic poisons that they're pouring on our food. That's going to make the population healthier by not being exposed. Just go look up atrazine, everybody. Look what atrazine is doing to us in the groundwater. And when you drink water that has atrazine in it because some farmer thinks he needs to use it to grow his grain because it's an herbicide that kills everything but grass. It's creating all kinds of problems. We know it's creating problems in almost every organism looked at. That's creating sexual problems and reproductive problems, cancers, and all kinds of stuff. So by remineralizing, that's really the first step. And this is what's ignored by the conventional guys when we go organic. When you go organic, it's extremely important to get your trace elements, macronutrients, micronutrients in balance. Then it's very important to get your calcium, potassium in balance. Calcium, potassium, magnesium in a proper balance. It's called the soil. It's the soil colloid actually holds these things. It's called the base saturation level. And they know scientifically, William Albrecht proved it, that by having your calcium, magnesium, and potassium in a specific balance on your soil colloid, and it's called base saturation levels, and I think it's 15-20% magnesium, 66.5, 70% calcium, about 5% potassium. You get those numbers correct, your organic matter is actually going to stabilize. And in stabilizing organic matter, you're actually sequestering carbon. So this should be subsidized by the government. I mean, we're paying, this whole fraud, carbon credits are just going to big corporations so they can produce more oil and gas and stuff like that. But I mean, if they were really real with this carbon sequestration thing, it should be going to small-scale farmers that are remineralizing, getting their soil quality balanced so that their organic matter is cycling properly, so it's producing humus, which are very long-chain carbon molecules that are actually chelating minerals and making them available so that the plants become healthier. And in becoming healthier, they have a higher sugar content, are performing photosynthesis better, are much more mineralized, and become much more nutrient dense. I mean, it's clear. Scientifically, all of these things have been proven. I've experienced it for the last 30 years on my farm, doing all of these things. I'm not just saying I've read about it. I'm saying I've done every one of these things. I've seen the changes. And everybody that's followed my advice is amazed. Especially people that have been following the university line, this propaganda that this criminal enterprise called University of Hawaii, and every state's got a criminal enterprise, an ag school that is basically there for the corporations to produce, justification for their toxifying our environment, for poisoning our food and destroying our birthright to clean air, clean water, clean food, and a clean environment. So I'm not quite sure. What time is it now?
We're a little bit...
7:04. Yeah, so I think we'll take a little break now for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk maybe a little more about GMOs and a little more about growing healthy food.
Very good. We'll be back in about 5 to 10 minutes with more of Supernatural Agriculture.
Well, the work was out on the street today.
And welcome back once again for the second half of Supernatural Agriculture with John Bloom.
Thanks, Michael. We was just listening to Frank, and I think he had a really good sense of what was going on this planet.
Sorry, ahead of his time.
Sorry, he's still not around. But the show tonight, I really wanted to talk about remineralization and the importance of minerals in growing a nutrient-dense food. And I began touching on something, the other part of the aspect of it, which is the plant breeding, and why do we need plant breeding? And, many different reasons. Obviously, people want bigger and better and sweeter and prettier or weirder or whatever it is they want. And the earliest plant breeders were just guys that did conscious selection of different fruits and vegetables and weeds and stuff, and eventually turned into the vegetables we eat today and the fruits we see in the store. But now there's the big push on GMO, and GMO really wants you to think, the Monsantos and Syngenta, that they're nothing more than a highly sophisticated plant breeding experiment. Now, what I want to explain right now, before we get into more specific GMO issues, is why did the real plant breeding really come on strong back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, and this was the hybridization revolution, where almost everything we buy now is hybridized for some purpose. My feeling is back in the 40s and 50s, the introduction of the real chemical sci-fi type of farming situation, we exacerbated the loss of these trace elements and the micro and macro nutrients and stuff in the ground. And plants that had evolved over, just through natural selection or through the selection of their local farmer that grew in certain areas. You got to remember, there were thousands of varieties of apples, hundreds of varieties, or probably 1,000 varieties of apples, and hundreds of different kinds of cabbages, and hundreds of different kinds of lettuces, all specific regional, growing in certain conditions and stuff like that. We're now focused on a half a dozen varieties of anything right now because they've been hybridized to such a point that if you don't commercially grow these hybrids, you're not going to get the amounts and the yields to justify the loans you took out at the beginning of the season. Remember, when we talk about capital-intensive farming, it's a farmer that's buying their seeds, buying a huge amount of chemicals, 3/4 of which end up in the groundwater, that are paying huge amounts of money for their food safety and their this, and then shipping their produce, halfway around the world, whether they're farmers in Chile or someplace else. And so there's a what we call capital-intensive type situation where a farmer literally has to go into debt at the beginning of the season to pay for the planting of his huge crop. Where a 500-acre farmer might have enough money to plant his 500-acre farm. Now these farms are 50,000 acres. And to come up with the money for fertilizer and all of that at the beginning of the thing, for a farmer to make even a living on 50,000 acres, he has to borrow a huge amount of money. And we're not talking about money, a huge amount of currency and or credits or whatever you want to call it. And at the end of the season, a huge amount of his profit is eaten up by these banks and corporations that have lent him that money. This is why farmers don't have the economic impact, and the raw materials don't have the economic impact they might have had 50 or 60 years ago. That's why a dollar earned by a farmer now that dollar doesn't flow through the local economy. A great deal of that dollar is immediately taken by the banks that lent him the money to actually plant that crop in the first place. So the reason, and so to get bigger, they need bigger yields in these demineralized conditions because they're just using NPK as much as possible. Because, to apply minerals on a 50,000 acre farm and stuff is something that's probably not going to be done. So they just use more and more of these chemicals. So they need plants that will grow in these demineralized conditions. These minerals, these substances that are created from these minerals, and these trace and micros and macronutrients, and the trace and the micro traces, create the colors and the flavors that are in natural food, what we call nutrient-dense, organically grown, sustainably grown, or whatever food. These chemicals, these phytonutrients, confer to the plants resistance to diseases, confer to the plants resistance to funguses, insects, and one other very important thing, it allows the plant to produce a viable seed that hasn't been altered or mutated by the solar radiation. Mm-hmm. So when you eat food from your local environment, of an open pollinated, natural, sometimes, even the hybrid food, now, not the real insane hybrid foods, like the corn that they grow, the hybrid corn they grow now is inedible, as far as I know, because it's just it's broken up and turned into food-like substances. I'm talking about edible food that you can eat right out of your garden. It has colors and flavors and stuff like that protect it from insects and funguses and solar radiation, so it can produce viable seed usually. And I know guys that grow hybrids, and they'll get a few viable seeds in there that actually grow great stuff. And they kind of reverse engineer it, and they keep growing it. I've got some eggplant that I'm growing now that probably came from a hybrid eggplant, and it's great, and it produces viable seed, and it grows true to seed. So it can be done. But I'm talking about open pollinated. If you have access to old varieties, heritage seeds or heirloom seeds or whatever you want to call it, I really recommend you grow those things first to see if you can grow it under your conditions. And then by natural selection over a few years, you should be able to find plants that can resist pretty much everything in your local environment if you are on it. Mm-hmm. Okay, you get a really good kale plant, let that kale plant grow for a couple of years, it'll seed out and use that seed from that kale plant. So, when they develop hybrids, though, the interesting thing about hybrids, and GMOs are off the scale on this aspect, is hybrids don't have the colors and the flavors. Everyone knows that the new tomatoes don't taste anything like a heirloom tomato. Mm-hmm. The hybrid vegetables and stuff don't taste. You eat a heritage food or an heirloom food or an open pollinated food, you go, holy crap, that is the most delicious zucchini I ever tasted. That's the most delicious this ever tasted. Because the evolution of it and the connection and the fact that it grows true to seed and stuff like that actually confers the phytonutrients and the minerals and all these things because it's been grown in a mineralized condition. It's been grown correctly. So a lot of these heirlooms won't grow in a demineralized situation. So a lot of people say, well, I can't grow those open pollinated things because they haven't remineralized. Mm-hmm. They don't have the ground is an heirloom. You can't just grow an heirloom vegetable in a chemi situation. It's not going to do it because it needs heirloom or heritage ground to grow in. I mean, this is the the disconnect in the university system is there's always this variable of remineralizing your ground and getting it right. And a lot of people will have grapes for 6 months in Hawaii, especially. Everybody that opens up a garden and throws a little compost on has great luck. And then after about 6 months, they go, oh no, now the diseases are coming. Now I can't grow anything. Everything's getting